Hello you guys, it's Katie and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be how to crochet for absolute beginner crocheters. I'm including everything you need to know about crochet all in this one video to help you guys out if you have been wanting to learn to crochet. I know there are so many different methods of teaching crochet and so many kind of confusing tutorials because they leave out certain things. With that being said, I wanted to make a video that is different and includes every single possible thing you could need on your crochet journey in order to learn to crochet. So your beginner project that you'll be making today is a dishcloth. So once you have it completed, it will look something like this. You'll get the full steps on how to make this and how to hold your hook and how to read the crochet pattern, what this type of yarn is, how to read the yarn label, all sorts of stuff that is super important when it comes to crocheting. Now obviously to make this dishcloth you're going to need some materials, and if you're an absolute beginner you probably have no idea where to start when it comes to materials. So I've made it super easy for you guys and I'm super excited to announce that I have just launched my Katiebeingcreative Learn to Crochet kits. Those kits are available on Katiebeingcreative.com. You can purchase them and it will be shipped to you. Or if you happen to be local to the Tampa, Florida area and you see me at a pop-up market, you can also buy one of the crochet kits from me there. And if you happen to be watching this video after you have already bought a crochet kit, then it is the perfect time to go ahead and get started. But if you haven't bought the crochet kit, go ahead, go to the link in the description box below to purchase it, or go to Katiebeingcreative.com and get your crochet kit, and then come back to this video, and in your kit you'll be told to come back to this video, and then you can go through all of the steps and learn everything you need to with crocheting. Plus, having that kit will direct you to tons of other resources that are going to be super helpful for you on your journey, such as other videos on different yarn types and other beginner-friendly crochet project ideas for you to make once you've gotten this dishcloth down, and all sorts of other things. So this is a really inclusive way to learn to crochet instead of just trying to find different videos and piecing things together on your own. And if you're one of my regular viewers and you already know how to crochet, this crochet kit makes a great gift for any of your friends or family members that you know have been wanting to learn to crochet, especially if you're not exactly sure how to teach them. Teaching crochet can be something that is quite difficult, but I have lots of experience with it. So I have confidence that through this video and through my crochet kits, you'll be able to learn to crochet, and not only learn to crochet, but master it. So if you already know crochet, or you're even not super familiar, you haven't crocheted in a long time, something like that, this video will be for you to completely get everything you need to know down. And now you guys might be wondering, why are we starting with a dishcloth? A dishcloth seems so boring. I want to get into blankets, or I want to get into crochet plushies, which the technical term is amigurumi. I don't want to start with a dishcloth. That might be what you're thinking, but I promise you it will be so worth it to start with this in order to get the basics down. So many people come to my crochet classes that I teach in person and tell me that they have tried plushies to start out with, or they've tried blankets, they've tried something that was more complicated, and they got so frustrated that they decided to come in person instead. And seriously, the dishcloth is like the perfect solution. It is something that's not too big to the point where you're gonna get frustrated making it and never want to finish it, but it's also not something that's too small where you're gonna feel like you didn't get enough practice at all by the time you're done with it. So the dishcloth is the perfect solution, and seriously, you guys will be super confident in your skills by the end of this. And if you are interested in making plushies, I plan on coming out with a part 2 similar to this, where there'll be another crochet kit and another video similar to this on making crochet. So it'll be designed for you to follow this kit and this video first and then move on to the amigurumi part 2. So if you guys are interested in that and there is enough of you that enjoy the Learn to Crochet kit, then there will be a Learn to Amigurumi style kit. I haven't come up with a name yet, but I feel like Learn to Amigurumi is kind of a fun name. So anyways, that is something to look forward to if you are watching this video and you already know how to crochet regular stuff like this, but you want to get into amigurumi, or if you don't know how to crochet at all and you want to crochet this dishcloth and then get into the plushies amigurumi side of things, then that is something to look forward to. As long as this goes over well, then that will be coming hopefully shortly after. Anyways, with that though, you guys, I know you want to get on to crocheting and learning, so once you have your kits, go ahead and get started with the rest of this video. To start, let's talk about the materials that you have. So, of course, you have a skein of yarn, ball of yarn, whatever you'd like to call it, but skein is the proper term. Next, you have a crochet hook. This one specifically is a 5mm crochet hook. You also have a yarn needle, which will be used at the very end of the project. And you have a stitch marker, which you typically use this for projects that are worked in a circle. This dishcloth is not going to be worked in a circle, so you won't actually need this for this project, but I do like to include this in case you want to move on to some more advanced projects once you have gotten this dishcloth down. And also I will show you a little life hack that you can use this for on this dishcloth. But for now, the main things you're going to need is the skein of yarn, obviously, and the crochet hook. So I'm going to set this needle and stitch marker off to the side. In the description of this video, you can find the link to this beginner dishcloth crochet pattern. I highly recommend you have this up at the same time as this video so you can print it, or you can have this up on your phone or computer or wherever else as you're watching this video, just so you get an idea of what each thing means as we go along. I currently have it up on my phone, as you can tell, but I would just like to go over on here for you guys. I will actually insert it on the screen because it'll be a little easier to see than on my phone screen. But on the materials, we have 100% cotton yarn, which is what you have here. Then we have preferred crochet hook size, 5mm, which you have there. We also have scissors. You will need these at the very end, but pretty much everybody has scissors, so I didn't obviously include that in your kits. And then the tapestry needle you do need. This is also called a yarn needle, like I mentioned earlier. And you do also have the stitch marker, although that is not needed, like I mentioned. Next on here we have the abbreviations. This is like a key for you to get through the pattern, because if you look down at the pattern, it says things like CH and SC. Those are obviously abbreviations, so when you need to know what each one of those things mean, you're going to look above and see what each abbreviation means. And then below that, at the very bottom, we do have a little how-to on how to do each of these stitches. So if you want to have a written how-to for how to do each thing instead of having to go back within this video, then you also have that available. So again, I highly recommend you have this open at the same time as watching this video so you can follow along. I will, however, also put on the screen what I'm currently doing so that you can get an idea, but it is nice to have this open at the same time so you can follow along and see. Right now we are doing an SC, which is chain, things like that. With that, we are going to talk about the yarn label a little bit, and then we'll get on to actually crocheting. So I do just like to give a brief synopsis about the yarn because this is something I didn't learn when I was starting, and it took me forever to learn about the yarns, and it is kind of important. So I like to give a brief little overview of what the yarn label looks like and what the things on the label mean. So Lily Sugar and Cream is the yarn. It is by Yarnspirations. If you look here, it's a pretty big yarn company. If you rotate to the right side of the package, we have here where it says made in Canada from 100% cotton. We're specifically using 100% cotton yarn for this dishcloth because if you do manage to finish the dishcloth, it is something that will be used a lot. So you want to have something like 100% cotton that can be washed pretty often. If you look here, it has a little picture of a yarn ball and it says 4. Above that, it says medium. That is the weight of your yarn. So weight probably sounds like how heavy it is, but that's not the case. Weight is actually the thickness of your yarn. So if you're looking here at the yarn, this is not super thick, but also not super tiny. So this is kind of your in-between, hence why it is a 4 medium. Yarn weights go all the way up to 7 jumbo and all the way back down to 0, which is lace. So almost like sewing thread, it is very, very thin. Last things I'd like to point out on this side of the package is you have 4.5 millimeter knitting needles mentioned. We're obviously going to skip over knitting because we're not learning to knit, we're learning to crochet. So we have 5 millimeter crochet hook suggested, which is also known as a US H/6. So just so you know, it could also be called that, but it is just listed as a 5 millimeter, and the hook you currently have is a 5 millimeter. These little symbols tell you about washing the yarn, so things like don't iron, wash color separately, that kind of stuff is what these little symbols are. And then if we rotate to the other side of the package, we have up here, it says worsted. That is again your yarn weight. Medium weight 4 is also called worsted weight. That's just another name for it. And then we also have 4-ply, which is again just weight 4, other ways of saying it. Next we have the actual size of the skein. So this skein is 2.5 ounces or 70.9 grams. So this whole skein is 2.5 ounces, and then it is 120 yards, 109 meters. So for an example, if a pattern says you need 3 ounces of yarn, you're going to need to have 2 of these skeins because this is only 1.5. Or if it says you need 150 yards of yarn, again, you're going to need 2 of these skeins because there's only 120 in this skein. That's just to keep in mind when you are looking at a pattern. Because this is a beginner-friendly pattern, I don't have it listed for exactly how much you're going to need. There is plenty in this skein. You could probably make even 2 dishcloths out of this skein, so don't worry about running out. But just so you know for the future, right here is where you can find the size of the skein, and a lot of times a pattern will give you how much yarn you need. So when you're at the store, you can buy the exact amount you need, or at least roughly about the exact amount you need. That is this, and all yarn packages will look a little different, but they do have this same information somewhere on them, and normally it's in this same sort of formatting. Last thing I'll show you is this little barcode side of the yarn. The main thing I wanted to point out is this name right here. This color is called Sunshine, so this is the color name. If you're looking for a yarn and you need to know the color name, this is where you can find that. Alright, so that is all about reading the yarn label. So now we're going to get on to crocheting. You can take this label off, you can rip it, you can slide it off, however you'd like. I try to slide them most of the time because sometimes if you rip it, you might need this information later about like how much is in a skein or something. And if you rip it, you might rip right through that. So I normally try to just slide it off. I'm going to just leave this yarn label off to the side because we're not going to need that anymore. Now, looking at this yarn, you can see that there is a little tail coming out of this center, which there are people that like to crochet from the center pull, which is what this is called, just pulling the yarn straight through the center. But as you can tell, me doing that, I'm already having trouble getting the yarn through. It's already getting snagged. So I personally like to go from the outside, especially as a beginner. It is a lot easier and a lot less frustrating to go from the outside. So that's what I'm going to have you guys do. Leave this tail alone, and this might even come through the other side. I have a feeling it will. So let's find the outside end, which it looks like this might take a minute to find, but it looks like this one right here is it. So I'm just going to pull it, and here's my end, and that actually was the end that was poked through here. So it was coming from one side out the other and then kind of hooked in right there, so that's why it was hard to pull. So anyways, I just recommend finding the outside. Anyways, I just recommend finding the outside end. It's really not that hard to find typically. It would just be one of these threads out here. For now, you're not even going to need the crochet hook. I'm going to just show you starting out with a slip knot, which if you're looking at the pattern, it does say CH26, which means chain 26. To start any chain, you're going to need to make a slip knot. So right now we're going to make that slip knot. And now just a reminder, as we are going through all of these stitches and everything, you can play back this video as many times as you need, and feel free to leave comments in the comment section down below and I can answer them to help you guys along if it is needed as you're watching this, but I am going to try to make this as clear as possible. So don't feel bad if you need more clarification or if you need to rewatch this over a million times. That's what the point of the video is. So feel free to go back as many times as you need in order to make a slip knot or to make a single crochet or whatever it is. So something to note before we get started with the slip knot, this end right here throughout the video I'm going to be referring to as your tail, and then your working end is going to be this end that is attached to the ball of yarn. For the slip knot, you can just lay your tail down on the table, and I would leave a little bit left so that you have some room to work with. And then you can take this working end that's attached to the ball of yarn and lay it right on top of the tail. So you're making a little ribbon shape. And now taking this working end of the yarn, you're going to lift up this little circle you made that's within the ribbon and take that working end and put it right under and through that circle. And you're going to grab that working end and then hold down on the tail at the same time. So your tail is down here and you're going to pull them apart. So it's going to go kind of off camera, but I'm pulling the tail down and the working end where this loop is, I'm pulling that up. And you want to just pull that until this loop gets tight. And this is your slip knot. This is a very big one, but this is a slip knot. And now this tail, you want to make sure you have, I'd say, 1.5 inches at least of your tail, and you don't want to cut this off. You want to leave this because later we will go on and secure this. So you just want to leave this where it is. So now that we have this big slip knot made, we can lift this up and just place it onto the crochet hook. The easiest way to do this is to just lay down your crochet hook now. We're going to take the working end and the tail at the same time and pull them both apart. So just pull them in opposite directions. And as you can see, the loop is getting tighter around the crochet hook. And I kind of got that wrapped up, as you can see, so I'm gonna just have to unwrap it and pull it tight around the hook. Now you don't want it to be too tight. This is what's called your tension, and it is one of the hardest parts to get used to. So you don't want to pull it too tight to where, let's say you're like this around the hook, and then you can't move the hook at all. You need to be able to move this hook, right? So you want it to be looser. If you need to loosen it, you can kind of just take this knot and pull it down and push the hook up at the same time, and that loosens it. So you want some wiggle room to where you can actually move this around, but you don't want it super huge to where it's just gonna fly off all the time. So even this might be a little too big. I'm gonna tighten it a tiny bit more here. So just like that is good. And there's no magic amount of tightness. It's whatever works for you. All right, so now we're on to making the chains. Now the pattern does say 26. Since this is a beginner first time crocheting, You do not have to follow the exact numbers that the pattern says. This is more about practicing than it is actually having an exact amount of numbers. So if you would like to try to actually do 26 and make sure that it's 26, I would recommend writing down tally marks as you do each stitch so that you can keep track, because it is harder to keep track after you've done it. But just know there's no pressure to keep an actual count. Alright, so on to making the chain itself. This tail I'm going to leave off to my right side so I make sure I'm not accidentally crocheting with it, because if I crochet with this, I'm going to run out of yarn pretty quickly. So I'm going to leave that off to the right side. Now when it comes to holding your crochet hook, there's no right or wrong way to do this. There's multiple different methods. You have to figure out whatever works best for you. So for me personally, how I do it is I keep my crochet hook in my right hand, and that is the only thing I hold in my right hand. My left hand always has the yarn. So when I am holding the yarn, I will wrap the working end around my pointer finger on my left hand, and then I will use my ring finger and my pinky finger here to kind of pinch it back here in between these fingers. And then I'll hold on to where this slip knot is, so right here, with my thumb and my middle finger. So this is just the best way I've found personally, but if you have another way that works better for you, then by all means go for that. Alright, so now when it comes to actually making a chain, we are going to yarn over, which yarning over refers to wrapping this working end of the yarn around the hook. So I'll show you that again. Wrapping this working end of the yarn that's attached to the ball of yarn around the hook. So I wrap mine around the back. You can wrap around the front, but it's a little harder to get through. So I do recommend wrapping it around the back. And I use my pointer finger here to wrap that around. So now that you have this wrapped over your hook, you're going to use your right hand, keep everything how it is in your left hand, use your right hand to pull straight through and underneath that loop that was already on your hook. Now that made one chain. So again, you're going to wrap around the back, rotate the hook, and pull this first loop under that second one. And now that is 2 chains. Now a big mistake that a lot of people make is as soon as they make a stitch, they will go ahead and tighten everything. You don't want to do that, because later when we're going into these stitches, you're going to have a hard time getting your hook in there. So I would just make the chain and leave it. Now don't pull up and don't tighten. Just leave it how it is. You always want to make sure that you have that little bit of wiggle room on the hook, but not too much wiggle room, which again is your tension, so that's one of the hardest things to get used to. So that just comes with practice. So you'll be able to practice and get used to this, and feel free to do as many chains as you need in order to practice. And notice how I started here with my middle finger and my thumb. As I'm doing chains, I'm bringing it up so that it is still close to the hook, so that everything isn't flying around. If I were to hold it down here, I would have a lot less control and everything would be flying around. So I'm holding it up here and wrapping around and pulling through. And then moving my finger up, wrapping around and pulling through. So again, yarning over is the technical term for this. And then pulling up a loop is the technical term for pulling through. So loop on your hook, yarning over, pulling up a loop, which is pulling this one under this one. And according to the pattern, you're going to do this 26 times. So I'm going to do that the 26 times, and then I'll come back to show you what that looks like. All right, here is the 26 chains now that I have made all 26 of them. And when you're looking at this, you want them to be somewhat uniform. Even mine aren't perfect, obviously, but you want them to be somewhat the same. So again, you don't want these holes to be too tight or too loose. If they're super loose, your stitches are going to be super big. If they're super tight, your stitches are going to be hard to get into and you're going to get frustrated. So if you need to, you can practice this as many times as you need. You can make a super duper long chain, and then you can restart from the beginning and make the slip knot and start making the actual 26 that you need. Whatever is comfortable for you. Again, this is more about practicing than it is actually making a dishcloth. So these 26 chains are like our row 0. If you look at the pattern, you can tell it just says chain 26. It doesn't say a row number in front of it. That is almost like our row 0. So now our first row is going to be SCs, which is single crochets. If you look at the pattern, it goes from 26 chains to 25 single crochets for the first row. That is because when we're looking here at this most recent chain, we're going to skip over this one. If you kind of wiggle the yarn, you can see that the working end of the yarn is currently in that chain. So for that reason, you're going to skip and go into the next one. Anytime you make a chain, that will be what you do, is at least skip one. The pattern might tell you to skip more than one, but you're going to skip at least one of the chains and go into the next one. So all you're doing is taking your crochet hook and inserting it into that chain. Keep in mind as you're doing this, you want the chain to be flat and you always want to be putting it into the front. So I don't want to be turning it around and then putting it here and then turning it and putting it here. It's all going to be twisted if you do that. So you want this to be flat and then you want to go into the front. So now that I'm in this first stitch, I'm going to yarn over, which is again wrapping that yarn around the hook. Again, I prefer to wrap it around the back. And then you're going to pull up a loop, which just like when we were doing the chains, pulling up a loop is just bringing this yarn under the next loop here. So then there'll be 2 loops on your hook. Next, you're going to again yarn over and you're going to pull this loop under these 2. So 1 and then 2. That makes your first single crochet. So now you're going to do that all the way down the line. So I'll show you a few more times. You're going to insert your hook into the next chain stitch, and then you're going to yarn over, again wrapping around the back, pulling up a loop, which is pulling under this chain. Then there's 2 loops on your hook. You'll yarn over again and pull under both. If it's easier, you can do one at a time, or you can pull through both at the same time. So again, inserting into the next stitch, which when you're looking at it, the next one is the smaller one. So this one right here that's kind of big, I'm not going to go into because I just placed a single crochet there. That's why it's a little bit bigger. So the next one is this hole next door that's a little bit smaller. So I'm going to insert there, yarn over, pull up that loop. Now with the 2 on my hook, yarn over to make 3, and pull that third one under the first two. So now I'm going to continue this all the way down. Again, feel free to repeat this part in the video if you need to hear it over again. Otherwise, I will see you once we get towards the end. And again, if you do want to keep track and make sure you have the correct number of stitches here, you can write out tally marks and you should have 25 tally marks. So one extra thing that I wanted to mention, as you guys can see, this yarn can fray a little bit. It's just because it is 100% cotton. I like to have you work with 100% cotton just because if you do end up actually finishing this and using it as a dishcloth, you can actually use it and wash it and everything, but it can be a little annoying with these bits that get frayed and like separated. So if you have issues with that as you're going through and doing your stitches, what you can do is just remove your crochet hook and pull on the working end and remove that stitch until you have just one loop left. So I have the one loop here. I pulled it out a little so I can fit my hook in there. And then I'm going to tighten my hook around it, and then I'm going to keep going. So if that happens to you, that's how you can fix that. So now that we're here towards the end, as you can see, the tail is right here. There is one more stitch to do right here. Again, if you're keeping track, this is your 25th stitch. If you're not keeping track, you just want to look for that last hole there and make sure that you do place a single crochet in that last one. Here's how it is looking now that we are at the end of row 1. So what you probably do want to do, even if you aren't keeping tally marks for stitches, you do probably want to keep tally marks for your rows. So I would recommend either in a separate spot or write down that this is your rows and write out like row 1 and then cross it off, or do tally marks for whatever row you're on. But just so you know, because it is a little bit hard to count the rows as you continue on. It's pretty easy to tell that this is just one row, but as we build on top of this, it's going to get harder and harder to tell where one row ends and where the next one begins. So because of that, it's a lot easier to write down tally marks as you go. It's basically a lot easier to do that in case you do have to set this down and come back to it later. You'll know what row you left off on. And speaking of knowing what row you left off on, I'm going to actually show you the little life hack that you can use this stitch marker for. So if you have to set this project down and come back to it, what you can do is take your crochet hook out of the project. I like to pull up on it a little bit so the loop is a little bigger here. Take the hook out, and you can grab this stitch marker and hook it directly into that loop where your hook just was, and then you can snap this little clip and you can pull either which way on this and your work is not going to come undone. Especially if you're setting this down and you have kids or pets that may jump up on the couch or jump on the table or whatever and pull on the yarn, it's very likely that your work is going to come undone if that's the case. So it is nice to have this little hack. I use it all the time to make sure when I come back to my work it's not going to be all gone. Because as you saw earlier, it's very easy to just pull on this working end to remove the stitches. Alright, so now once you want to come back, you obviously just take that stitch marker out and place your hook right back in where you left off. So now finishing off row 1, we are yarning over, which is again wrapping it around the back and pulling up that loop, so just pulling it straight through. And now this chain is just your turning chain, so now you're going to turn the whole project. So it's now going to go this direction, and you're working on top of what we were working on previously. So now looking at the top of your project, you can see that it looks like little V's from the top of each stitch, and then looking at the front here, this is what it looks like. So as we go into the next row, row 2, we're still doing single crochets. So you're going to go into the next stitch, which make sure you're not accidentally trying to go into the chain we just made. The chain is this loop here. Again, if you wiggle the yarn, you can see the chain is right there. So we're going to skip that and go into this next one. Looking at the front of it, right here is where you'd want to go in. Looking at the top of it, once we go in there, you want to make sure that you're completely under the V. So this looks a little different because when we were doing the single crochets earlier, you were just doing them into chains, so it was only like one loop pretty much. Now you're going under this little V. So once you insert into the first stitch, look at it and make sure you're under both. If you go just under the first or only under the back, it's a completely different technique. Anytime it doesn't tell you to do one of those techniques, you are just going to go into that hole under the V. So now that you're here, we're going to repeat the single crochets. They just look a little different because you're under that V. So again, for a single crochet, you're going to yarn over, pull up the loop. So this time you're pulling it under the V. And now you have 2 loops on your hook. You're going to yarn over and pull under those 2 loops. And you know you're ready to move on to the next stitch when you have only 1 loop on your hook. When there's just 1 loop left on your hook, that means you have completed the previous stitch and you're ready to move on to the next one. So again, looking here, it's not this wider one because I just put a stitch in that. It's this one here that I'm going to go into, and I'm going to flip it and make sure that I'm under the V, which I am. There's 1 and 2 sides of the V. So now I'm going to yarn over and pull up that loop. And now it gives me 2 on my hook. I need to complete the stitch by yarning over and pulling through those 2. And then it leaves me with 1 on the hook, so I'm ready to go on to the next one, which is right here. So I'm going to go under that V again, yarn over, pull that loop under the V, yarn over, and pull through both of these. So now we're doing this all the way down the line, so I'm going to complete this, and I'll come to you at the end of the row and show you what this looks like. Now we're here at the end of row 2. I have 2 more stitches left, so 1 more that's going to go right here. And then there is 1 more right here. This one can almost look like it's not a stitch because if you look at it, it's almost like falling off, but it is a stitch and it is your final one. If you flip it, you can still see that there is a V right there. So you want to go under that and make your last stitch. And again, for this row and every single row from now on, you should have 25 once you complete the row. So now this is rows 1 and 2 completed, and this is what it looks like. To finish off row 2, we're going to yarn over and pull up that loop to make the turning chain, and then you're going to turn. Now here's what you should be looking like at the end of row 2. Now the next row in the pattern has you move on to half double crochets, so that's what we're going to be doing. Now, if you don't feel comfortable with the single crochets yet and you would like to keep trying those, you can do a bunch of rows of single crochets until you get ready for the half double. Then you can watch this portion of the video. So if you'd like to repeat rows 1 and 2, you can keep doing that, or if you'd like to move on, then you can do that as well. Whatever you feel comfortable with, but I am going to move on to the half double crochet for row 3 since that is how the pattern is written. So to start a half double crochet, instead of going directly into this first stitch like you would for a single crochet, you're first going to yarn over. So you're going to have 2 loops on your hook and then go into the stitch again under that V. Then you're going to yarn over again and pull up that loop. So now there's 3 on your hook, and you're going to yarn over again and pull through all 3 of those. Sometimes if these loops are tight, it can be hard to pull through all 3 at once, so you can just do 1, 2, and 3. Do them separately if that helps. So that is what a half double crochet looks like. Let's do a few more together. So again, into this next hole, if you look, this hole here is the one we just did. It's a little bit bigger because we kind of widened it when we put a stitch in it. And looking at that hole, right on top is the stitch we just did. So now we're looking at the next hole, right on top, there is no stitch in that one. So that's where we're going next. Again, starting by yarning over first, and then inserting, looking at the top, we're under that V, yarning over again, and pulling that loop under the V. Now we're going to yarn over again and pull through all 3 of these, doing 1 at a time if you need to, if that's easier. I'm going to show you a few more times, and then we're going to fast forward in time at the end of the row. So again, we're just adding an extra loop that we wrap around before going into the next stitch, and then we wrap around and pull under the V just like normal. There's 3 on your hook, wrap around, and pull under all 3. So let me show you one more time. We're going to yarn over, insert into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up that loop, then yarn over and pull through all 3 of those loops. So far that's made 4 half double crochets. One other note I would like to make for you guys is now that you know a chain and a single crochet, you could make this whole dishcloth out of single crochets if you wanted to. You could also make this whole dishcloth out of the half double crochets that we just learned. There's no right or wrong rules for what stitches you're using. This pattern is just designed to teach you the basic stitches, the main ones being single, half double, and double. So that's what we're going through in today's video. But if you feel half double and double, or if you feel double are too advanced, you can stick to simply just the singles and make the whole dishcloth if you want. It's completely up to you and whatever you feel comfortable with. But anyways, I'm going to complete this row of half doubles and get back to you once I am at the end. Here we are at the end of the row, and I have 2 more stitches left. So I'm going to do this second to last one, and then this last one, which, like I was mentioning in the previous row, sometimes it looks like there's not a stitch there, but there is. You want to make sure you're going into that one. And again, once you finish this stitch, you have 25 in this row total. Now, as always, we're doing that turning chain. So yarning over and pulling up a loop and flipping back over. So that is row 3 done. It's kind of hard to see, but if you look really close, the half double crochet row that we just did is a tiny bit bigger than the single crochet rows that we did previously, as well as the half double crochet just has a little bit of a different texture. So that's all it is just a little bit different, but it is a common stitch that you will see in quite a few patterns. Now we're moving on to row 4, which is a repeat of row 3. just doing the half double crochets. So I'm going to show you that again, which is yarning over first, inserting your hook into that next stitch, yarning over again and pulling up that loop. Then with the 3 on your hook, you're going to yarn over and pull that loop through all 3. So now I'm going to complete this row and come back to you once I'm at the end. Again, it is just a repeat of half double crochets all the way down the line. Here we are at the end of the row. Again, sometimes this can look like the very end, but there is one more right here that we're going to place the final half double crochet into. Sometimes this last one can get a little tight as well, but you still want to place that one in there. And then, as always, at the end of the row, we're going to do the turning chain, which is just yarning over and pulling up that loop, and then flipping everything around. And here's how it is looking right now. So this has now been 2 rows of single crochet and 2 rows of half double crochet that we've completed. So as the pattern is written, the next row, which is row 5, is a row of double crochets, which is the final stitch we are learning for this dishcloth. So I am going to move on to that next. But again, if you would like extra practice on the half double crochets, you could do a few more rows of that, however many rows you want really, to get the hang of those half double crochets. But for the purposes of the video and following the pattern how it's written, we're going to move on to the double crochets. So for the double crochets, it starts out very similar to the half doubles. You're going to yarn over first and insert into that next stitch. Again, making sure you're going under that V, and then you're going to yarn over and pull up that loop. So you are pulling under that V stitch, and now you have 3 on your hook. You're going to yarn over, and instead of like the half double pulling through all 3, you're going to pull through 2. So 1 and 2, and then there's 2 left on your hook. You're going to yarn over again and pull through those 2. So that makes a double crochet, and if you notice, this is a much taller stitch than the previous stitches we've been doing. So that's why it's called a double crochet. It's almost like double the size of a single crochet. So we're going to repeat this all the way down, so I'll show you a few more times. We're going to yarn over and insert your hook, yarn over again and pull up that loop. Now with the 3 on your hook, you're going to yarn over, pull under 2, yarn over again and pull under the 2. And again, you're ready to move on to the next stitch once there is only 1 loop on your hook. So now moving on to that next stitch, we're going to yarn over and insert into the next stitch, yarn over again and pull up that loop. Now with the 3 on your hook, you're going to yarn over and pull under the first 2, then yarn over again and pull under the last 2. Now there's 1 loop left on the hook. We're going to move into the next stitch, which is again yarning over, inserting into the next, yarning over, pulling that loop under the V, yarning over again and pulled through 2, yarning over again and pulled through 2. So that is your double crochets. I'm going to repeat this again all the way down to the end, and I'll come back to you once I have reached the end. Alright, here we are at the end of row number 5. So I'm again yarning over to go into the next stitch, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over and pulling through 2, yarning over and pulling through 2. And there is one final stitch here, so I'm going to make that last double crochet into that stitch. And now we're going to do a turning chain, just like always. So we're going to yarn over and pull through that loop, and then flip the project. So as you can see, this stitch looks quite a bit different from the others. It gives a lot more room in between it, and it does, again, just give a different texture, just like all the stitches. So now the pattern has us do one more row of this. So we're going to start that, again, by yarning over, inserting that hook into the next stitch, yarning over again, and pulling through that loop. And then with the 3 on your hook, you're going to yarn over and pull through the first 2, then yarn over and pull through the next 2. And we're going to repeat that again all the way down until we have completed this row, which is row number 6. All right, here we are at the end of row number 6. So I'm going to complete this last double crochet into this stitch. And then we're going to chain 1 and turn, just like always. So here's what it is looking like for the first 6 rows with the 3 different stitches we have learned. Now for rows 7 through 24, 24 is the final row, we are repeating this. So you're going to repeat this 4 times over total. So from here, it's going to be 3 more times. So next we're moving on to row 7, which for rows 7 and 8, we are repeating rows 1 and 2. So that is going back to the single crochets. So to do a single crochet, again, that is just inserting into the next stitch, making sure you're going under that V, yarning over, pulling up the loop to where there's 2 on your hook, then yarning over and pulling through those 2. So again, this is row number 7. I'm going to complete one of those stitches in each one until we get to the end. Again, it should be 25 for each row. I have completed all 25 single crochets for row number 7. So I'm now going to do my turning chain, which is just yarning over and pulling up that loop, and then flip everything around. And for row 8, we're again doing just single crochets because we are repeating this process over again. So again, just inserting into the next stitch, yarning over, pulling that loop under the V, yarning over again, and pulling that loop through the 2. So now I'm going to continue this all the way down for row number 8. Here I am at the end of row 8, so I'm placing my last single crochet, and again doing that turning chain and then turning. So now that is row 8 complete. On to rows 9 and 10, which is a repeat of rows 3 and 4. So rows 3 and 4 is the half double crochets again. So I'm going to yarn over first and then insert my hook into this next stitch, yarning over again, pulling up that loop. Then when there's 3 on your hook, you're going to yarn over and pull through all 3. And that creates a half double crochet. So again, I'm going to repeat this all the way down the line. Here I am at the end of row 9, and I am placing that last half double crochet of this row, into that last stitch, which as always is 25 in the row, and then doing the turning chain and turning. So now we have another row of half double crochet for row 10. So again, a half double crochet is yarning over, inserting your hook into the next stitch, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, and pulling through all 3. So now we're repeating this all the way down again. Now at the end of row 10, so I am completing that last half double crochet, then doing that turning chain and turning the whole project, and then on to row 11. So rows 11 and 12 are repeats of 5 and 6, which is where we did the double crochets. So again, a recap: to do a double crochet, you're going to yarn over first, and then you're going to insert into the next stitch, again going under that V, then yarn over and pull that loop under that V. There should be 3 on your hook. Now you're going to yarn over and pull under the first 2, leaving 2 on your hook, yarn over and pull under those 2. And now moving on to the next stitches, repeating the same process. Here's the end of row 11. So I am placing this last double crochet here, and then doing the turning chain and turning the whole thing around to do row 12, which again is all double crochets. So another recap for a double crochet: we are yarning over, then inserting into the next stitch, yarning over and pulling up that loop, then yarning over, pulling through 2, yarning over and pulling through 2. So that is how to do a double crochet again. So this whole row is going to be those double crochets, again repeating until we get to the 25 of them. Here we are at the end of row 12, so I'm placing that last double crochet in there, and then, and like always, doing that turning chain and then turning the whole project around. At this point, you are now halfway through your dishcloth. So just for reference, it will be essentially twice this size now that we are halfway through. If you wanted to only repeat these steps one more time, it would still be a good size dishcloth. So there is that option if you are getting a little bit sick of this, I understand. But if you would like a little bit more practice, then I would definitely recommend going through and repeating this 2 more times like the pattern is written. So I'll mention that again once we get to that point, but I did just want to tell you that we are now at the halfway point. So now we're again repeating rows 1 through 6 as rows 13 through 18. So I'm going to continue to show you like I did for the last rows at the beginning of each row and then at the end of each row. But it is going to be the exact same thing as it was for rows 7 through 12, just so you know. So let's go ahead and continue. So row 13 is a repeat of row 1. So we're going to insert into this next stitch, again making sure you're under that V, and yarn over and pull up that loop to where there are 2 on your hook. Then you're going to yarn over again and pull through those 2. And yet again, we're repeating this all the way down the line. If you're keeping your tally marks, make sure that you have 25 by the time you get to the end of your row. All right, here we are at the end of row 13. So I'm again going under this last V to place this last stitch. And then yarning over and pulling through to create that turning chain. And now moving on to row 14, which is a repeat of the single crochets again. So again, inserting into the stitch, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, pulling through 2, and repeating that all the way down. Here we are at the end of row 14, so I'm placing that last single crochet, and then yarning over and pulling up that loop for the turning chain, and turning to start row 15, which rows 15 and 16 are a repeat of rows 3 and 4, which are the half double crochets. So here's a recap for a half double crochet. We're going to yarn over first and then insert into that next stitch, again making sure you're under the V, yarning over and pulling up that loop, and then yarning over and pulling through all 3 of those loops. And now we're repeating this all the way down for the whole row. We're now at the end of row 15, so I'm placing this last half double crochet in the last stitch, and then doing that turning chain and turning my work. One quick side note that I wanted to mention, if you are noticing that your dishcloth is not coming out very straight, there is probably 2 reasons for this. One of them could be that you are skipping stitches throughout your rows. So if that is happening, I do recommend making those tally marks for every single time you complete a stitch, and then at the end of each row making sure that it is the exact same. So if you're following the pattern exactly, it should be 25 stitches. If you're doing a little bit less or a little longer, whatever, just making sure that it's the same amount of stitches for every single row, because if you're skipping some, that's going to cause the whole project to get smaller and smaller and kind of start forming a triangle. And if you have just a little bit of a triangle situation going on, but it's not super bad, it's probably just that you're getting more comfortable with your stitches as you're going along. So these stitches at the top are probably ending up tighter than the ones at the bottom. So if that's the case, that's really nothing to worry about. But if you are having that issue where it's turning into a triangle, I would recommend counting those stitches, as well as if you're having the opposite problem where it's expanding outward, you may be adding too many stitches into the same hole by accident. So if that is the case, I would also recommend using those tally marks, counting those stitches, and making sure you have the same amount in each row as you go along. Just wanted to give you that little tip, because sometimes I know it can be frustrating if you don't understand what you're doing wrong, and those are the main things that could be happening. Anyways though, on to round 16, which is a repeat of, again, 3 and 4, which is the half double crochets. So we are yarning over, inserting into the next stitch, yarning over, pulling up a loop, yarning over, and pulling through all 3. And we are repeating this all the way down. Here's the end of row 16, so I am placing this last half double crochet and doing the turning chain and turning the whole thing around. So now we're on to rows 17 and 18, which are a repeat of rows 5 and 6, the double crochets. So let me recap what a double crochet looks like. You're going to yarn over, insert into the next stitch, yarn over and pull up that loop. Then there's 3 on your hook, you'll yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And again, we're repeating that whole thing the 25 times. We're now at the end of row 17, so I am placing this double crochet, and then again yarning over, pulling through the loop to create that turning chain, and flipping back around. Which, by the way, I don't think I ever mentioned this, but this chain is just called a turning chain because you're doing it as you're turning, but it's a regular chain. There's not anything special about it, as you could tell because it's the same thing we did down here at the very beginning. But anyways, it's a turning chain because you're turning. Probably that's pretty obvious, but just thought I should mention that. So anyways, now we're on to row 18, which is again a repeat of double crochets. So we're going to yarn over first, go into the stitch, yarn over again, pull up that loop to where there's 3 on your hook, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2. And we are repeating this all the way down. Here we are at the end of row 18, and I am placing this last double crochet. Sometimes I get those end stitches pretty tight, which you may also be doing as well. If that's the case, it's okay. You just gotta wiggle the hook a little to get it in there. But I'm placing this last one here. So there is one more time that we're going to repeat these 6 rows over again. But if you're happy with the length of this and you feel like you've had enough practice, you could go ahead and finish off right here. If you would like to do that, you can skip ahead in this video to where the finishing off steps are. At the bottom where you would skip in the video, I'm going to have everything labeled for what each section is. So you can go ahead and skip to where it says finish/fasten off, and that will show you how to complete the next steps. But if you would like to get even more practice and follow the pattern all the way through, then we're going to repeat this one more time for a total of 4 times. So I'm going to do that with you. So putting my hook back in here, and this is finishing row 18. I'm just going to do the turning chain and turn the whole project. So now we are repeating this for the 4th and final time. So we're on rows 19 and 20, which are repeats of rows 1 and 2. So rows 1 and 2 are the single crochets. So single crochets, again, are just inserting the hook, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over and pulling through those 2. And this is the process you're going to repeat all the way to the end of the row. So I completed all the single crochets in row 19. So I'm now doing that turning chain, and now I've flipped over to start row 20, which is again the single crochets. So I am inserting my hook into the next stitch, yarning over, pulling up that loop, yarning over and pulling through 2, repeated all the way down to the end. Now I've completed all the single crochets for row 20, so I am yarning over and pulling through to do that turning chain and turning the whole project. So now we're starting rows 21 and 22, which are repeats of rows 3 and 4, which are again the half double crochets. So the half double crochets are yarning over, then inserting your hook into the next stitch, yarning over again and pulling up that loop, yarning over and pulling through all 3. and repeating this all the way down. And here's the final stitch for row 21. So I am yarning over and pulling through that loop to create the turning chain and turning the whole project to move on to row 22, which is repeated of those half double crochets. So again, we are yarning over, inserting the hook, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, and pulling through all 3 to create a half double crochet. And as I'm sure you could guess, we're repeating it all the way down. Here we are at the end of row 22, so I'm going to do that turning chain and turn the whole project to start rows 23 and 24, which are the last 2 rows, you guys. For these rows, they are the double crochets. So again, to do a double crochet, we're yarning over, inserting into the next stitch, yarning over and pulling up that loop. Now there's 3 on your hook, you're yarning over, pulling through the first 2, then yarning over and pulling through those last 2. And repeating this to the end of the row. Here we are for the end of row 23. So I'm placing this last double crochet, and then I am chaining 1 and turning to do this final row, row 24, which is again the double crochets. So I'm going to yarn over, insert my hook, yarn over again and pull up that loop, yarn over again and pull through 2, then yarn over again and pull through those last 2. And we are now repeating this until the very end. Here we are at the end of the final row, row 24. I am placing this last double crochet here, and the pattern says to chain 1. You don't need to do that at the end of this final row. You can just skip that step. And now we're going to be finishing off or fastening off. It's known as both. It's listed as FO in the crochet pattern. So to finish off, you're going to grab your scissors and you're gonna want to leave a tail. So I'd say maybe like 1.5 inches, 2 inches is pretty good. Nothing less than that. It's always better to have too long than it is to have too short. So I'm just going to cut the yarn with that tail left over. And I left my crochet hook in here because now that this yarn is cut, I can loop it around and pull through like I'm going to do a chain, but instead I'm pulling all the way through until it comes out the other side and then pulling this tight. And that is all fastening off is. Now next and final step that's in the pattern is to weave in your ends, which is where the yarn needle, tapestry needle, it goes by multiple names, but this needle, this is where this comes in. So if you're familiar with sewing at all, this is pretty similar to sewing, but if you're not, that's okay, I will still explain this. So the purpose of this is to secure the project. If I were to just snip this end as well as this end, you run the risk of the whole thing coming apart, which we obviously don't want since we worked so hard on this. So we're going to weave in the ends to secure everything. So this yarn needle we are going to use and put this tail onto the needle. The easiest way to do this is to pinch the end of the yarn, kind of making a little curve, and go ahead and pinch that. And then you can fit that through the hole on your needle a lot easier. And once it is pretty well through, you can just pull on it and leave a little outside so you have some room to work with. We're going to weave this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth to secure it. So I'm going to go to the stitch next to it. You always want to go to the stitch here. You don't want to go over here randomly, because if you were to do that, you're going to have a big loop. So you want to go to the stitch right next door and just stick your needle straight through and pull it till it's tight. And then now through the front. I went through the back first, so now I'm going through the front of the next stitch all the way through and pull it till it's tight. And now through the back again of the very next stitch all the way through and pull it till it's tight. And I am repeating this for a handful of stitches. There's no exact amount. I'm just repeating this over and over, like I said, for a handful of stitches. I think I'll do one more here, and then I'm going to go back the direction I came, just because it'll be a little more secure than finishing it right here. So I'm going to go back the direction I came and do a few back and forth this way as well. I feel like that's probably pretty good. If you would like it to be even more secure, you could go down and back up and then right and left again, like whatever you want to do. But I typically just go right, left, and finish it there. So something like this is good. And now this is the part where you want to be really careful. You're going to take your scissors, and you don't need this leftover bit. So you're going to snip pretty close to the project, as close as you can get without cutting the actual project, of course. You want to just be cutting the yarn tail, not the project itself. And then you can see there's a little piece sticking out there. All you have to do is pull this apart a little, and it'll hide itself in there. If you can still see it a little, you can also take the end of your needle and kind of poke it in there. And that is how you weave in your end. So you want to do this same process for the end we started with as well. It is the same exact thing, so I'm going to go ahead and do this off camera, and then we will look at the final result of the dishcloth. It's kind of hard to get it all on camera, but here is the full thing. So if you had stopped before that last repeat, you would be ending up about right here. So it would be about this length, which is still a good length. But if you followed all the way through for the repeating everything 4 times up until row 24, then this is what you are looking like. And now I can guarantee you, if this is your first time crocheting especially, but even if you're just getting back into crocheting after a while, whatever the case is for you, yours is not going to look like this, and that is okay. This is 6 years of crocheting, actually maybe 7 years? I don't know, either 6 or 7. At this point I can't do math after I've been sitting here filming this whole time. But you will get there with practice. After a month or so of practicing consistently, I'd say practicing every day or every few days at least, you could get to the point where you make this exact dishcloth and it looks exactly like this. So don't get discouraged if yours is looking all sorts of crazy. trust me, everything I made in the beginning looked all sorts of crazy as well, so there's no need to get discouraged or anything. This is all about having fun anyways. So with that though, I hope you enjoyed and I hope you found this helpful to learn to crochet. I tried to make this as simple as possible for you guys, so please let me know in the comments what you think. And if this did teach you to crochet, I would be so honored if it did. So please let me know. And like I mentioned, if you have any questions, if you need help, the best way for me to get back to you is in the comment section down below. I'm honestly not very good about getting back to messages or emails, but I do get back to the comments on my YouTube videos pretty quickly typically. So if you have a question, the comment section on this video is pretty much the best place to ask it. And if I, for whatever reason, miss your comment, I don't end up seeing it, a lot of times somebody else can answer it as well that may be watching this video. So also that is a good resource if I happen to forget it, but that doesn't happen very often. But anyways, with that, here is your final dishcloth. I also wanted to show you, here's what the final skein of yarn is looking like. This is the skein that I used, and it really doesn't look like I used that much. Honestly, you'd be surprised how much you can get out of a skein. So here's what the skein looks like, and for reference, here's what a full skein looks like. So it's really not that far off from what a brand new full one looks like that hasn't been used versus this one that has been used. So if you would like to practice some more, I would say you can more than likely get another full dishcloth, or at least like 3/4 of a dishcloth out of this if you would like to try again and practice some more. Alright you guys, thank you so very much for watching this video, especially if you've made it all the way to this point in this video. I am so excited to be able to share crochet with you, especially if you are an absolute beginner, like I assume most of you are watching this video. I am seriously so grateful for you purchasing my kit and wanting to learn to crochet and using me as your guide to learn to crochet. And it would be greatly appreciated if you have made it all the way to the end of this video to also give it a thumbs up. The YouTube algorithm will push this video out to more and more people that also probably want to learn to crochet if you give the video a thumbs up. So it'd be greatly appreciated because I would love to teach as many people to crochet as possible. Now for those of you that did purchase the kit and are following along with that, make sure you go back to my site and follow along and read the rest of what's on there. There's a lot of good information on there for you that is not just this video. So make sure you go on there and take advantage of those resources. And now that you have followed this video through and hopefully completed your dishcloth, I would say you could call yourself a crocheter. So I hope you'll consider subscribing to this YouTube channel and checking out some of my other videos that are super fun for other crocheters, such as yarn hauls and crochet with me's and things like that. But anyways, again, thank you so much for being here. And thank you especially if you purchased my crochet kit and took the time to learn to crochet from me. I really appreciate you being here and wanting to learn crochet from me. So thanks so much for being here, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.